Now we're going to take the terms we just learned regarding borders and boundaries and apply them to Indiana. First off, we have a physical boundary to our south, and that would be the Ohio River, which forms our border between Indiana and Kentucky. But we also have a physical boundary over here on the southwestern part, and that's the Wabash River. And the Wabash River comes through there, something like that. So there's the Wabash River. So we have two physical boundaries there. However, the rest of Indiana, we can see as geometric boundaries, geometric shapes. And so let's first off go over to the eastern boundary, try to explain how that formed. First off, we have to understand the Great Miami River and where it flows into the Ohio River. And at that point, that is where we could call that the southeastern corner of Indiana. And so go ahead and put a dot there where the Great Miami River meets the Ohio, and then that forms the extreme, take it straight up, that forms the eastern boundary of Indiana with Ohio. Now go over to the western side. What we have to understand is the city of prominence way back when was Vincennes. No, not that prominent anymore, but historically definitely was. So we go back to late 1700s, definitely a city that mattered. And so directly north of that is what forms our border with Illinois. But once we get to the Wabash, we cross the Wabash, then it becomes a straight line all the way up. And so that just has to do with the fact that Vincennes had importance, had clout in its time, and so just going straight north, that's our western boundary. Now our northern boundary, a bit interesting. And so originally it was decided that it would be from the southern tip of Lake Michigan all the way across to Lake Erie. However, we can tell that that's not the case. And so what ended up happening in the late 1700s, Indiana and its government actually lobbied for 10 more miles north so that they could then get more access to Lake Michigan. And so Indiana's border is actually 10 miles north of that line. That is the southern tip of Lake Michigan. And that's also, we could have a more economic, but also a transportation advantage as far as having a port there on Lake Michigan. Now I'm drawing roughly, it's not going to be perfect, but roughly the border between Mexico and the United States. Like so. So that's not perfect, but that's alright. Here we have a good example of a physical boundary in terms of the Rio Grande, which we see going up all the way to right about there and continues up further. So that would be a good example of the physical boundary, the role of a river, in this case the Rio Grande, in terms of separating or delineate the border between two states. We also have a good example of geometric boundaries in terms of the rest of the border, which you see these straight lines. So further, we could say combined, though, both of these borders, this physical and cultural, in terms of geometric boundary, also are good examples of cultural or ethnic boundaries, because we know that to the north is predominantly English-speaking United States, and to the south predominantly Spanish-speaking Mexico. In this Google Map satellite view of the United States and Canada, you can see several geometric boundaries that form the borders of individual states or provinces. Further, you can also see the very long geometric boundary that goes from east to west from about Vancouver to northern Minnesota. One of the things that you can really see here is that the geometric boundaries, they really don't do a good job of separating areas, because you really can't see on this map where the boundary is, for the most part, between the United States and Canada, especially there from Montana, North Dakota, the northern border. It's just a line. It's not like a physical boundary, like a river, like the Rio Grande, or like the border of a water body, like a coastline. So that's the problem with geometric boundaries. They don't really do a good job of separating two different areas. Now, in the case of the Pyrenees Mountains and the Alps, it forms a physical boundary. And we have there in the southern boundary of France, the summits of the Pyrenees Mountains, for the most part, is the natural or physical boundary that separates France from Spain. But also in the Alps, you could say the Alps is a nice boundary for Italy and its neighbors to its northwest and east. And so these both represent physical boundaries, but you could also say they also do a good job of separating cultures. And in the case of the Pyrenees Mountains, there's definitely a difference or a divide between, to the north, France with its culture, for example, language spoken is French, and to the south, Spain, where of course they speak Spanish. In the case of Italy, you could say the Alps have done a good job of maintaining or acting as a border or divide between Italian culture and non-Italian European culture to the boundaries on the other side of Italy. In this Google Maps satellite view, we can see the desert serving as a nice physical boundary for these Middle Eastern states on the Arabian Peninsula. So this is an example of a physical boundary because if you think about deserts, they're so sparsely populated. They're such large areas of emptiness that they serve nice natural barriers because there's really nothing in this particular area. So it serves as a nice way to separate Saudi Arabia from the neighboring states to their south. But you can also see how these areas have been essentially, because it's a desert area, essentially it's large areas of essentially the same landscape, large sand, large areas of desert, that they just use for the most part geometric borders, geometric shapes here. We can see throughout this particular area of the world. I'm going to highlight a key problem or key challenge of physical boundaries is that sometimes they change their location. So here I'm drawing the Missouri River that flows, and so my whole life I thought, well, the Missouri River separates Nebraska from Iowa, with Nebraska on one side and Iowa on the other. After all, I'm a professional geographer, I should know that. 6th grade geography B champion, I should know that. But once again, let's talk about a situation where I kind of was embarrassed. So I flew into Omaha, and I flew into the Eppley Airfield, and got in the tour bus, the cargo bus that was moving me around. And so I got to this point right through here on Abbott Drive, and all of a sudden a sign said, "Welcome to Iowa." So surely I should see river underneath me. I should see some type of water body underneath me. The Missouri River should be underneath me if I'm entering Iowa after leaving Nebraska, but it wasn't there. And we continued further on this road, and then the sign said, "Welcome to Nebraska." Once again, I should have seen the Missouri River. So what happened here? The situation was, since Iowa and Nebraska were declared states and their borders defined, the river's actually changed its course. So the river used to flow and meander like so, with this blue line that I'm drawing right now. So it used to flow like that. And so now it makes sense because this meander used to go right around this area that is today Iowa. So once again, physical boundaries in the case of rivers, they sometimes change their course. They sometimes move. Here's the country of Indonesia. It's the world's largest Muslim country in terms of number of adherents. But it's a good example of a fragmented state. As you can see, it covers a large area, but it's also broken up into all these individual parts and islands. So this can be quite challenging in terms of ruling over an area that's quite large, but also quite fragmented. Essentially, think of it as these individual islands have these distinguishing cultures, distinguishing characteristics, in which, these people say, well, we want to rule over ourselves. One example of that is one of the newest states to form. Down here on this island, on the eastern part, it's a country called East Timor, which is one of a few countries, another one being Philippines and South Korea, in which it has a large Christian population there in Asia. Don't see too often countries that are Christian in this part of the world. But in any event, one of the things is why this state come to be is this particular area is much different. This East Timor is much different than the rest of the state of Indonesia, and so they said, we're going to want to rule over ourselves. So this is something we could see going forward, is more of the fragmented states of the world separating or breaking up into individual parts over time. So when we think about how do new states form, where are new states going to form throughout the rest of our life, fragmented states are a good place to start. Here we have South America, where we have two independent states that are good examples of landlocked states, states that have no access to a large ocean. Those would be Bolivia and Paraguay. So in the case of South America, no access to either the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. Over on the western edge, you'll find the country of Chile, which is a good example of an elongated state. So what I'm drawing right now is The Andes Mountain serves as a nice physical boundary for the most part for Chile's eastern borders. But in the case of Chile, you're going to see large differences between those in the northern part of the state. In the case of Chile, in the northern part, it's very much like a hot, sandy desert. In the middle part of the state, it's got more little seasonality, more similar to what we find in Indianapolis, Indiana. But then you get to the southern part, it's almost like coastal Alaska. So in the case of Chile, you're going to see large differences as you go latitudinally closer to the poles or closer to the equator in either direction, north or south. And so it's very much like a fragment state. You're going to see large differences. You're going to see individual cultures, individual areas that have their own ways of life. And so this could be similar to a fragment state. A key challenge is to have all these differences within a country as far as being able to rule over the area. Now, if we thought, well, let's say we had an elongated state that instead of being more longitudinal, like we see in the case of Chile, being stretching across several different latitudes, in the case of an elongated state that's more, let's say, horizontal or more parallel to the equator, there you're not going to see as much differences. In the case of here, there's not much difference because as far as the temperature, it's pretty much the same. But when you get differences as far as going further away from the equator, get countries that are elongated, that cover large amounts of latitudes, that means you're going to have large differences. And so these are going to be more of a challenge, would be these elongated states compared to the ones that I've shown that example there.